Welcome to Tizky Sour. Well done if you're watching live, because I presume that means you're staying at home, following the advice and hiding from Storm Eunice. We aren't going to talk about that storm too much tonight. We have a bunch of other very big stories for you. We're going to talk about the information war, which is going on over Ukraine at the moment. Both the West and Russia playing a part in it. We've got a couple of Labour stories for you. Angela Rayner wants to shoot to kill. Keir Starmer wants to shoot anyone on the left of the Labour Party, metaphorically. And we also have a Downing Street party story for you. I'm joined by Aaron Bastani. How are you doing, Aaron?
Michael, I'm doing super great. We managed to weather the storm. How are you doing? You good?
Yeah, I'm well. Well, you're on the South Coast, aren't you? So you should have did you have a very dramatic scenes, or was it much of a muchness?
Not particularly. I mean, people were saying, oh, wow, the sea's crashing against the flood defences. That's kind of what they're for. I mean, maybe I'm being quite flippant. I mean, it sounded quite violent. I didn't take the dog out for a walk, for instance, but, my wife took the dog out for a walk. I couldn't go to the dentist. It was shut. I mean, it seemed bad, but I don't think we were the worst hit. No, it sounds like there were some pretty bad things happening. From what I saw in London, it seemed worse, but maybe that's just because the buildings are taller.
That's an interesting theory. Maybe it is. Maybe we need shorter buildings for the next time this happens. We do want to have your comments and your questions coming in throughout the show. So tweet on the hashtag #TiskySour or put them in the comments box. It's been a confusing few days for anyone trying to follow the standoff between Russia and Ukraine. At the start of the week, Western leaders were ramping up the possibility of an imminent invasion, and a time frame was even set, with multiple outlets reporting that the early hours of Wednesday morning would see the launch of a Russian invasion. This tweet from The Sun was posted on Tuesday. They accompanied the warning of a 1 a.m. invasion with breathless footage of tanks shooting missiles. It was a story apparently fed by US intelligence. But then 1 a.m. on Wednesday passed, no invasion was forthcoming. In fact, when Wednesday arrived, headlines informed us Russia had pulled back some troops from Ukraine's border. The Russian Defense Ministry claimed a number of battalions were returning to their bases after pre-planned drills. European stocks rose, fear of war subsided. But before the close of the day, US and UK intelligence pushed back against Russia's claim of a de-escalation. The West accused Russia of lying about troop withdrawals. The New York Times reported a senior American official who refused to be quoted by name told reporters that far from winding down its deployment, Moscow had added more than 7,000 combatants. The American official directly accused Russia of lying, saying there was fresh evidence it was mobilizing for war. Those briefings were then echoed by Joe Biden the following day.
How high is the threat of a Russian invasion right now?
It's very high.
Why?
It's very high because they have not moved any of their troops out. They've moved more troops in. Number one. Number two, we have reason to believe that they are engaged in a false flag operation. They have an excuse to go in. Every indication we have is they're prepared to go into Ukraine, attack Ukraine. Number one. Number two, I've been waiting for a response from Putin for my letter, my response to him. It's come to that Moscow embassy. They're faxing it here. Not faxing it, they're sending it here. I have not read it yet. I cannot comment on it.
Have you been briefed on it in any way?
Oh, yeah.
Is your sense that this is going to happen now?
Yes. My sense this will happen within the next several days.
What are the things that is there any diplomatic path still available?
Yes, there is. There's a clear diplomatic path. That's why I asked Secretary Blinken to go to the United Nations and make his statement today. He'll lay out what that path is. I've laid out a path to Putin as well on, I think, Sunday. And so there is a path. There is a way through this.
Are you going to call Putin? Will you speak to Putin? Are you going to call Putin?
I'm not calling Putin. I have no plans to call Putin right now.
British intelligence on Russia's plans mirrored that coming from the United States. Jim Hockenhill, British Chief of Defence Intelligence, said this week that contrary to their claims, Russia continues to build up military capabilities near Ukraine. Russia has the military mass in place to conduct an invasion of Ukraine. And the UK Ministry of Defence even tweeted an image showing the possible routes a Russian invasion could take. They suggest an invasion could include, as its first phase, a ground movement of Russian troops moving in on Kiev and battalions moving into the east of Ukraine. In phase 2, Russian troops would take the rest of the country. The key comes with a caveat. It reads, "Warning, ground movement indicators are for illustrative purposes only." So how should we interpret all of this intelligence? If we were told an invasion would happen on Wednesday and it didn't, should we dismiss the rest as hyperbole? Well, on one level, US intelligence getting a date wrong doesn't necessarily mean the rest of what they're saying is rubbish. But even people deep within the US-UK security establishment have expressed doubts about the strength of the Western intelligence being fed to the press and public. Sir John Sawyers is a former chief of MI6. He gave an interview to Ben Judah from the Atlantic Council this week. Asked about the West's use of declassified intelligence in this current standoff, he said the following.
Putin's Russia has been rather skillful at shaping narratives, at using their arguments and at times their propaganda in order to shape opinion, not partly in their own country, but even more so in the West. And I think what the US administration in particular has been quite adept at in this crisis has been, first of all, corralling the West and coordinating and orchestrating a common Western response. And secondly, not allowing Putin to have it all his own way on the airwaves. Now, you talk about intelligence. I think actually these are not sort of gems from deeply sensitive agent reporting. This is what has been released. The idea that Putin might want to dislodge Zelensky and replace him with a puppet government, or that he's going to contrive a pretext for a Russian intervention in the east of Ukraine. These are based on a growing understanding and analysis of Putin rather than deep secret intelligence reports. And I think wrapping them up as intelligence and adding a few sort of juicy names to the reporting just gives some good stories from the media and helps push back against the narrative. It's a skillful use of information and analysis to turn the tables on Putin and his own ability to dominate the airwaves.
Later in the interview, Ben Judah asked a question which made the significance of all this even more explicit.
It would seem as if the Western governments might have exaggerated a bit the prospect of a full-blooded invasion of Ukraine.
Well, what I do think is that it was easier for Western governments to bring together their agreed response and to stand up to Putin in the face of that sort of threat. And as President Biden, perhaps rather infelicitously described, he got into trouble when he started speculating about what would happen if there was a minor incursion into Ukraine in one of his earlier broadcasts on this. I think that is more difficult, but it's also the more likely scenario that a combination of cyber, of limited intrusion, of political steps associated with the military maneuvers, as he did in 2014 in Ukraine and as he did in 2008 in Georgia, is probably a more likely scenario. I think if he'd gone all the way to Kiev, and he could prove me wrong tomorrow. I don't know what's going through Putin's head, but watching him over the last 20 years or so, I think it's not really in character for him to invade and occupy a whole country and think that is going to be a success. They had their own experience in Afghanistan, as we have had since then, he has watched very closely what the fate of the Americans and the coalition in Iraq was. It's quite easy to drive to Baghdad and overthrow the government. It's a whole lot harder to hold the country together over the next 10 or 20 years.
So according to that former intelligence chief, yes, what was in fact analysis might have been dressed up as intelligence. And yes, the risks might have been exaggerated, but that was to build a broader coalition. If we just said, or if the West just said, if America just said there might be a minor incursion in Ukraine, it would have been harder to unite the West. Now, I find this a little bit worrying because we've seen how intelligence was used to build a coalition before, WMDs in Iraq. Not that, this is necessarily a repeat of that. It's potentially more complex. Aaron, I want to bring you in on this. I mean, what do you make of the breathless coverage we've seen of Ukraine, Russia over the past week? And what did you make of those comments from the former MI6 chief?
Yeah, it's been really quick moving. So, I mean, you would be very unwise, I think, to sort of make a pronouncement today and think it's going to last longer than, say, 72 hours. I think, it's still a very dynamic situation, events unfolding from effectively day to day. Even, in the last few hours, there's been an explosion in, I think, Donetsk, which is causing a great deal of discussion and in terms of what that might catalyze going forward. Was it a false flag and so on? Talking about that video, Michael, I mean, wow, that was really, really, really insightful. And I was very surprised that a former head of MI6, Britain's spy agency, would so openly talk about the reasoning behind what was going on here. This was an information war. This was effectively a propaganda effort by the British government, various Western allies with their media to effectively mislead domestic audiences. Now, the argument would be, which he says there, in some ways overt, some ways less so, Putin does this, so we have to do it too. We are misleading people in order to avert a material military escalation in Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine, and potentially that may involve at some point Western allies as well. So we certainly don't want to do that. This is by far the better of two evils. I mean, that's one logic, but still, it is deeply worrying for me, Michael, that a former head of the security services can so openly talk about the instrumentalization of the media to advance the interests of the state. The media is meant to be independent of the political power of the state and its various agencies in order to hold it accountable. This to me is really worrying. And the way he's talking about the media is really not that different to how you see in authoritarian regimes. Now, I'm not saying we live in an authoritarian regime. And by the way, the reporting of, the US and the UK going into Iraq, Afghanistan 20 years ago wasn't particularly good either. It's not like things have really deteriorated in that respect. But to be talking about it so overtly in public really struck me. And I was surprised. Until the 1990s, I think, I don't know the specifics here, but MI6 didn't even really admit it existed. It's not even called MI6 now. I think it's called SIS or something. Goodness knows. But it's the external spy agency for the United Kingdom. And now you have somebody, what next, Michael? Is he going to go on TikTok, say, talking about how the UK helps overthrow regimes it doesn't like overseas? So, yes, the public nature of it was very surprising and very insightful.
It is very odd if you're fighting an information war to then give a live commentary of it. It feels like it, potentially undermines the point. For the first rule of information warfare should probably be don't talk about information warfare. But maybe the fact that they're talking about it, that is maybe that suggests how inherently transparent they want to be. I want to stick with this issue of intelligence briefings. I've got another clip for you because we've shown you the former MI6 chief on Radio 4 this morning. Nick Robinson interviewed a former chief of the US Army. Michael Mullen was chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff between 2007 and 2011.
That level of detail released publicly and put on the front page of every media outlet in the world is a much different tactic. And it's a tactic designed to let the world know and let Putin know. We all know what's going on. Whether that'll have a deterrent impact is still out there. The war hasn't started. Hopefully it won't.
There is a risk, though, isn't there, after the failed intelligence about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, that it allows Putin to claim that it's all false, that it's all made up, that the West's intelligence can't be trusted?
The intelligence back then really was used to start a war. The intelligence that's being released now is attempting to do the exact opposite, to make sure a war, a very devastating war, costly war, will not start.
So the difference between the intelligence we shared around Iraq and the intelligence shared around Ukraine isn't that the old intelligence was false and we've now learnt our lesson, but rather back then we were using flimsy intelligence to start a war, and now we're using flimsy intelligence to stop one. Not particularly reassuring. And whatever the motive, this slapdash approach is making a lot of people look quite silly. Melinda Haring is Deputy Director of the Atlantic Council, one of the most prestigious and well-funded pro-NATO think tanks. Last Friday, she tweeted, "Putin has big weekend plans in Ukraine. 1, he's going to cut power and heat, knock out Ukrainian Navy and Air Force, kill General Staff, and hit them with cyber attack. 2, then install pro-Russian president, and 3, resort to full-scale military invasion if Ukraine doesn't give in." 7 days have now passed and none of those things have happened. And it's not just critics of US foreign policy that are getting frustrated with this gung-ho approach. David Arakamia is the head of President Zelensky's Servant of the People Party. He said this week, "I think when this phase disappears in 2 or 3 weeks, we should do a retrospective analysis of how large, very well-known media began to disseminate information worse than Skabiva and Solovyov to Russian state propagandists. Frank fakes in CNN, Bloomberg, the Wall Street Journal. We must study this because these are elements of a hybrid war. The hysteria is now costing the country $2 to $3 billion every month. We can't borrow in foreign markets because the rates there are crazy. Many exporters refuse. Every day we count the losses of the economy and then distribute this information to our partners through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs because they must understand when someone decides to move the embassy to Lviv, they must understand that such news will cost the Ukrainian economy several $100 million. Of course, while the Ukrainians may be critical of hysteria in the West, they are even more concerned by the disinformation campaign coming from Russia. Their foreign secretary today tweeted, "We categorically refute Russian disinformation reports on Ukraine's alleged offensive operations or acts of sabotage in chemical production facilities. Ukraine does not conduct or plan any such actions in the Donbass. We are fully committed to diplomatic conflict resolution only." Russia's disinformation, of course, goes beyond claims about sabotaging production facilities. This week, Putin went so far as to accuse the Ukrainians of genocide in the Donbass, and that's a claim that echoes commentary being broadcast across Russian media. Margarita Simonyan is head of the state-funded broadcaster RT. She recently said on a talk show on the Russia 1 channel, "It's a war between the Ukrainian government and its own people. People are dying there every day. Thousands of civilians died there. Thousands of children lost their limbs there, buried in little coffins. Go there once, you'll change your attitude completely, and you'll understand that Russia can't help but stop this war. Do we have to wait until they organize concentration camps out there, until they start poisoning their people with gas?" This is, of course, nonsense, and it appears to be a clear attempt to drum up support in Russia if Putin does decide to invade Ukraine. And there has been an escalation on this front today. Max Seddon is Moscow bureau chief at the Financial Times. He tweeted, "Separatists in East Ukraine have announced they're evacuating the entire civilian population to Russia, citing increased shelling on the front lines. Pushilin claims Zelensky will give Ukraine's army the order to attack, sounding more and more like a potential Russian casus belli." So Pushilin there being a leader of one of the separatists in eastern Ukraine. Aaron, there is clearly a very, very intense information war going on. Ukraine is stuck in the middle. I mean, in a way, we're all stuck in the middle. How do we make sense of the claims and counterclaims that we're hearing?
Well, the default should be, Michael, that you're just very skeptical of any single news source. That should be the default. And when you see in legacy media talk of intelligence sources, okay, well, what's the intelligence source? Is it signals intelligence? Is it literally the interception of information within, say, the Russian military establishment? That's a big deal, right? If you intercept signals intelligence, that's a massive deal. Is it human intelligence? The arguments for going to war in Iraq were based on human intelligence. Now, of course, people can want to peddle their own agendas around the reality. In Iraq, it was about WMD. Multiple people lied. In one instance, that was to basically get citizenship in Germany. There was a former nuclear scientist, basically lied his pants off in order to integrate himself with people who really exercised a great deal of control over him. It could be domestic political interests trying to, fight their corner, and they think that regime change suits them, as was the case for certain people in Iraq. So human intelligence is always very dodgy. What we're seeing here, though, Michael, is when you hear in the media and legacy media intelligence, often it doesn't seem to relate to either of these rather. So you go back to the original video recording we saw of the Atlantic Council. By the way, the Atlantic Council, who's on their advisory committee? It's the son-in-law of Leonid Kuchma, a guy called Pinchuk, who is a domestic oligarch who has massive interest in the media. So again, if you're talking about a non-governmental organization which has an impartial overview of what's going on in the Ukraine, I would suggest it shouldn't be somebody whose own advisory council includes a Ukrainian national who's married to the daughter of a former president of Ukraine. Again, just my personal opinion. You know, incidentally, Kuchma was involved in the Minsk II process, so actually the Atlantic Council would be on the other side. But regardless, these aren't impartial actors necessarily. I mean, my God, Ukraine is it's a crazy, crazy country with regards to oligarchical factions moving from one side to the other, which really makes a sort of, you know, it's derisory, the idea there's some good guys and bad guys in terms of the country's elite, because they swap sides, you know, so frequently it's hard to keep up. So skepticism is very useful. And like I say, that thing about intelligence, is it signals intelligence? Okay, then take that seriously. Is it human intelligence? Well, who are the sources? Do they have an agenda of their own? And if it's neither of those two, if it's just analysis, as John Sawyers said to Ben Judah, then you should just dismiss it out of hand. And the best approach, and you'll hear this, I think, frequently with people on YouTube, you know, you'd hear it from Russell Brand or somebody on the radical right, or Glenn Greenwald, or you and me, or an ultra-leftist. The best approach generally with these things is to have a range of news sources. So I always say to people, you know, read The Economist, read The Times, read the FT, you know, get the newsletters, read stuff from the Telegraph. I mean, it's a hell of a lot of work, right? Maybe narrow it down. Read Novara media, look at domestic media content coming out of these countries. Finally, the big problem in getting good information when it comes to Russia and what it views as its sphere of influence, or China and its sphere of influence, is that we have very few journalists in this country who either speak Russian or Chinese. We certainly don't, Michael. You have a few very good Russian speakers at the BBC, but other than that, not really. And so actually journalists capable of doing that skeptical, hard, nuanced work, engaging with the primary sources, very difficult, very rarely exists. So what we're left with instead is pundits, often with a vested interest in a certain outcome, or even just not taking, you know, it's the sources they're receiving skeptically. That's not good enough if you want to be informed.
I mean, I suppose I'd add a couple of things, which is, because obviously, you know, what people might say to us who are, you know, less critical of the American or UK defense establishments, or NATO, for example, they'd say you're playing into Putin's hands, because precisely what he wants isn't so much people in the West to say, oh, Putin is great. It's for people in the West to throw their hands up and say, well, I've got no idea what's going on, so I'm going to be completely, you know, nihilistic about this. Who knows the truth? So I'm going to sort of abstain from even taking any judgment. Now, I do think there could be something to that. And so I would say don't just distrust everything. Obviously, you have to have a skeptical attitude to all of these things we're hearing, especially when it comes from, you know, any government intelligence agency, because as you've seen, both from that former MI6 chief and that former chief of the US defense staff, they're quite openly using these briefings as a method of warfare. Now, that could be justified. You could say, look, if by talking about a false flag operation, you make a false flag less likely, that's potentially justifiable from a, you know, a strategic point of view. But at the same time, you have to, you know, be aware that that's probably what's going on, right? So you are being played in a way. Whether it's justified for them to play you is a slightly separate question. I'd say the easiest way to get grounding in sort of foreign policy questions is basically to ground yourself in recent history, because who is where right now in eastern Ukraine, who's firing what missile, I think it's going to be, however long I spend on the internet this evening, it's going to be very difficult for me to work it out. Working out what are the different grievances on each side, what deals were made, why Russia is annoyed about the expansion of NATO, why the Ukrainians might want to be part of a Western alliance. All of these things we do have a much deeper understanding of, because they're not just reliant on he said, she said. So I do think that grounding in recent history, which is actually something that I think the mainstream media is terrible at getting across, because all they always start the story wherever it makes the other guys look bad. So they start the story 2014, Putin didn't like the pro-Western government in Ukraine, so he started invading. He took Crimea and he made sure the country would be collapsed for the next 8 years or however long it's been. What that ignores is that before that, you had a situation where the EU said to Ukraine, look, you can't have relations both with the EU and Russia economically. You're going to have to choose. They put them in a very difficult situation. They also didn't give the Ukrainian president a particularly good deal. So they turned to Russia. That prompted an uprising and what can reasonably be called a coup, even though, again, you could say that was justified because the president at the time had shot on protesters. All I'm here to say, I'm not going to give you a short history of Ukraine because it is incredibly complicated, but it is grounding your understanding, grounding your knowledge in recent history that I think really helps with that. I do actually recommend on this front, Adam Tooze has a great blog where he goes into sort of the past 10 years in Ukraine, which is much less biased and sort of simplistic in the sort of Manichaean, there's good guys and bad guys than you will see, even on the BBC, and especially obviously in the Times and from the government. Aaron, I don't know if there's anything you want to add on this before we move away from Ukraine, Russia.
I think you've put it superbly, Michael. The whole Manichaean good guys, bad guys, that rarely exists in life. It certainly doesn't exist in post-Soviet states and their politics, like really more than anywhere else. So it's the piety and the self-righteousness and the surety that people have with their kind of takes can be very, very grating. And it is just remarkable how little you can learn from the media. If you want to be uninformed about things like Russia, Ukraine, like you say, watch the BBC, go on the Guardian website, read the Times. Like I say, you want to read a wide range of sources. If you're time limited, you're wasting your time there. It's like, you wouldn't be able to make sense of anything, really. Like you say, Maidan in 2014, it was a coup. There clearly were people getting involved in that, leveraging it in certain ways to maximize their interests. Now, like you say, it's also legitimate because you had protesters being fired on by the government, so it's very complicated. But when we talk about, the various oligarchs which go from one side to the other, a lot of these sort of post-Soviet, freedom fighters who were on the same side as the color revolutions, a great deal of them, not just in Ukraine, but many other countries too, were actually, the sort of the key guys in the Soviet apparatus before the fall of the Berlin Wall and before 1990, and it all changed. These were party men. So it is very, very complicated at the best of times. And what I would say to our audience is, of course, inform yourself. Adam Tooze is always a good place to start, virtually anything, Michael. But also that the Russophobia and the Sinophobia, I think, is just really deeply unhelpful. And I think it also helps, one more thing, try and put yourself in the shoes of somebody who's in receipt of state media in Russia or China and try and think how they think. Russia has been invaded in the last 200 years 3 times. You've got Napoleon, you've got after the revolution in 1920, and of course you have by the Third Reich after 1940-41. And so within the Russian psyche, there is actually a perfectly understandable and I think legitimate fear of invasion by very powerful countries. And so that can be leveraged by a domestic political elite to say, look, we have to get involved in Ukraine because we're going to have NATO and we're going to have US soldiers on our doorstep in a country which we historically view as part of Russian civilization. You don't have to agree with that or not. But my point is, that's what many, many people themselves believe in Russia. So read Adam Tooze, be skeptical, and also, don't do the whole bigotry, othering of Russians or Chinese or Iranians or whoever it is the BBC doesn't like this week.
And don't, like Ian Dale, call anyone with a different perspective to the UK government a fifth column, which he did last night on LBC. Completely disgraceful stuff. Last month, the Sue Gray report into Downing Street parties was spiked in case it prejudiced a police investigation. It was a suspicious move, especially as the police didn't explain how releasing the report would prejudice anything. There was one half-decent explanation I heard at the time, though. It was that if Sue Gray published her report, those under investigation would be able to craft their answers to be consistent with whatever she found, and by keeping the report secret, they wouldn't be able to do so. Well, that already tenuous justification has now been blown completely out of the water. ITV's Paul Brand has revealed that number 10 staff, including the Prime Minister, will be able to see interview notes Sue Gray's team made about them before they fill out their police questionnaires. In a letter to Downing Street staff, Sue Gray wrote, "I appreciate that this is a worrying time for those affected by this process, which I do not wish to compound. In light of particular circumstances surrounding this set of events, I have, as an exceptional measure, decided that individuals may be provided with limited access to the notes." She also admits this is not a standard practice, saying the focus for individuals should be on completing the police questionnaire within the timeline given. Access to notes from previous interviews are not necessary to do this, nor is it standard practice in internal investigations such as this to share or agree such notes with interviewees. So if it's not necessary to show these people notes from the report before they answer the police questions, and if it's not standard practice, why is she doing it? If the whole point was the Sue Gray report couldn't be released in case it prejudiced the investigation by showing, the people under investigation by the police what to say and what not to say. Obviously, if it's not in the Sue Gray report, they go, well, I'm not going to admit that to the police, am I? They don't want to contradict what's in her report because then they can get into even more trouble. So while no one else can see the Sue Gray report, the only people who can see it are the people for whom seeing it might prejudice the investigation. Aaron, can you make this make sense?
Michael, you're the smart one. You make sense of it for me, please. I know you ask questions. You're the host, but come on.
Well, it doesn't make any sense. So I suppose the question is, if you were, Sue Gray's PR person, how would you possibly sell this to people? Because it's so ridiculous as to, she's saying it's not usual for people to see the notes of an interview they've done in one investigation before they speak to another one. But I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah, I mean, the only people that...
What I think...
So I was going to say... Yeah, the only state agency that normally is allowed to do that is cops, and it's normally evidence of them being bent. That they can, I mean, they're not meant to, but often they'll see the notes of colleagues, before they write their own, so they have stories which align relating to a certain event. From what I gather, they're not meant to, but they do. I mean, and it tends to be an indicator of corruption. So, I mean, this is a bit different. This is kind of a twist on that. But you think Sue Gray should have a PR person? Michael, she's a civil servant. This isn't Ash Sarkar. Not everybody has an agent, Michael. I think you've got all this fame is getting to your head.
I'm sure with all her fame, she must have someone doing, comms. Someone leaked this to ITV, so there were presumably some people who are unhappy about this. I do have one theory as to why this might be happening, which is that I reckon she let Boris Johnson see it. So she let Boris Johnson see the notes so he could craft his... This is all complete speculation, by the way. So that he could craft his answers. And then she was worried that one of the... someone else in Downing Street would be pissed off about this. Like, why did Boris Johnson get to see the notes, but I didn't get to see the notes? And now she's sent this email saying, it's kind of weird for me to send you the notes, but I'm going to do it anyway. And she hoped that would keep them all quiet because it was in their interest to see the notes before they went to the police. I feel like that could potentially be the sequence of events. Although obviously that's not justification for it. That's just an explanation of what she might be thinking here.
Who's going to call it out? Lib Dems? Keir Starmer certainly isn't. Mr. Vicks Vapor Rub. He's not.
Well, he loves calling out this kind of stuff. This is his bread and butter. He loves this.
A civil servant. He's going to call a civil servant bent. Okay. Really?
Sorry, no, you're right. You're right. No, you're right. I take your point. He will only call out someone who is an elected Tory politician. The moment it's the establishment, the moment it's the civil service, the moment it's the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Starmer, will not criticise them. Big flaw in his politics, which he's just sort of institutionally pro-establishment, emotionally pro-establishment. He can't bear to criticise what are supposed to be neutral bodies, but very clearly aren't. Let's go to our next story. Angela Rayner has said she thinks cops should shoot terrorists first and ask questions later. She made the suggestion on Matt Ford's Political Party podcast. Let's have a listen.
The perception of you would be that you're on the left of the party, that you are very sort of soft to hard left.
Yeah, I love that term. I'm soft left. Bit soft.
Is that how you would describe yourself?
I mean, most people recognise soft left, so I would describe myself as soft left. But you know what? On certain things, I'm not though, because on things like law and order, I'm like quite hard line. I'm like, shoot the terrorist and ask the question second if I'm on it. I'm like, sorry.
No, God, they like it.
That's the most controversial thing I've ever said.
No, absolutely no.
Angela, that might well be the most controversial thing you've ever said, and for good reason. Diane Abbott said this in response. Is Angela suggesting a mandatory death sentence for suspected but not convicted terrorists? Tory MP David Davis agreed, saying, we need our security services to make the right decision, not a shoot first, ask questions later decision. This kind of heavy-handed approach cost John Charles de Menezes his life. I wonder if the former Director of Public Prosecutions would back such a move at Keir Starmer. Davis is right. It was a reckless failure on the part of the police to ask questions that led them to kill this man. 27-year-old Jean-Charles de Menezes. He was believed to be a terrorist on shoddy circumstantial evidence. The police shot dead the young electrician as he sat on the tube at Stockwell Station. We've recently covered the killing of Menezes in some detail, but he's not the first nor the last innocent person to be killed by the police because they failed to get their facts straight before firing their guns. In September 1999, Harry Stanley went to his brother's house to try and fix a broken table. He realised the broken leg would need repairs, which he could only do at home, and so the Glaswegian painter and decorator wrapped it in a bag and set off home. On the way, he stopped in a pub, the Alexandra in Hackney. Placing the table leg on the bar, he drank a lemonade. What he didn't know is that a panicky bystander was already calling the police. Mistaking his Scottish accent for an Irish one, noting his red hair, and taking the table leg to be a sawn-off shotgun, the caller had somehow decided that Stanley was an IRA terrorist. As Stanley left the pub, 2 specialist armed response officers arrived on the scene. They shouted, "Armed police, drop the gun." He slowly turned around to face them, and they shot him twice, once through the hand and then in the head. He died immediately, less than 100 yards from his house, where his wife and their 2-year-old grandson were waiting for him. Only 10 days before, he'd had life-saving surgery for cancer. The police, of course, tried to smear the innocent man they'd killed. This is from the Scottish Daily Record in April the following year. Police have told the widow of a Scot gunned down by marksman that her husband was the victim of a bizarre suicide. They claim Harry Stanley, 46, had a death wish when he walked through the streets of London armed with a coffee table leg in a plastic bag. Harry's family last night accused investigating officers of a massive cover-up after they suggested he deliberately put himself in the line of fire because he had cancer. Police told the family's lawyer that a line of inquiry was that Harry was depressed because of illness and wanted to lure police into a confrontation in the street. Aaron, I want to bring you in on this. Angela Rayner saying, police should shoot first, ask questions later. What's she thinking? Why is she saying this?
I don't know. It was a comment. I mean, I don't find Matt Ford particularly funny. I find his impressions quite funny, but as a political comedian, I don't find it. The idea of political comedy I find quite dire anyway. If I actively didn't want to laugh, I'd probably listen to like Aisha Hazarika do a stand-up routine, but that's a separate question. Maybe if I had stitches in and somebody said, look, you can't laugh for the next several hours, I go, okay, what I'll do is I'll just go on YouTube and binge watch Aisha Hazarika make jokes. In terms of this, the police already are allowed to shoot and they're allowed to kill somebody if there's an imminent threat. This is not a political dividing line, as I understand it, Michael. Nobody's saying when there's the London Bridge attack and there's an armed shooter and they're shooting and people could be losing their lives. Nobody is saying you don't have armed police deployed. Nobody's saying that, as I understand it. I could be wrong, but that's not a dividing line in politics. Where there is a dividing line is to say you have to have sufficient reason to kill somebody. And that's why it's not shoot first. You have to think before you shoot. Like I say, there has to be a plausible threat to human life. This guy walking around with the leg of a coffee table, clearly isn't that. So this is one of those imaginary dividing lines, which is kind of concocted by right-wing radio shock jocks like Ian Dale and the tabloid press. And it doesn't help Labour, even if Angela Rayner is on the right of the party. She says she's on the soft left, but on Law and Order, she's on the right. Fine, knock yourself out. But as a Labour politician, I don't see how it helps you to repeat this putrid nonsense, which has absolutely no grounding in reality. Then you see it repeated by Carl Turner, a Hull MP, a very strange online persona that he's cultivated. He's on £80,000 a year, yet seems to think he's working class. And, saying that, it's because working class people don't have much time for terrorists and thugs, good on Angela. This isn't the reality of crime, Michael. Something like 1 in 20 burglaries end in a prosecution at the moment. We know that. Large swathes of the country, for almost all crimes, there is no punishment. Just a fact. Look at sexual assault statistics. You know, if you've had your bike nicked in London, it's basically not a crime. You know, you might get a police reference number, if that. Okay, that's the reality of crime in this country. It's being mugged and nothing happening, or it's somebody nicking your bike, or it's somebody smashing the window of your shop. That's the reality of crime. But for some reason, Michael, Labour politicians in particular have to kind of float off into this imaginary fantasy world. You know, you aren't an extra in season 2 of The Bodyguard on BBC. It is not armed police shooting down a gunman. That is not the reality of crime. And I think it doesn't help them politically to frame law and order in that way. It seems to me that you're just basically conceding the rhetorical and the ideological ground to the right, to the worst people in British public life.
I think you're absolutely right to say, you know, it's a non-problem. There isn't anyone in the, you know, in the political, or no one's saying if there is an active shooter, don't shoot them. You know, no one's saying that. Maybe shoot them in the leg. You know, you don't necessarily have to shoot them to kill. I don't know. I'm not, I don't work in operations in the anti-terror police. But this idea that there is one side, there is one side of the political divide that says don't under any circumstances kill a terrorist before you put them on trial, and another side who's the realists who say no, you should, and this is a real problem. This is a real argument we have to have. It's just ridiculous. Like I asked on Twitter today, because I had the thought, are there any deaths from terrorism in the UK that happened because cops weren't trigger happy enough? Like this would be a problem, I think. You know, if we could point to a situation, there were a bunch of people who got killed by a terrorist who didn't need to get killed because the police, you know, were saying, well, if I kill them, maybe I'll have to fill in too many forms. That hasn't, no one found me an example. I wasn't expecting one. And I did get a really good reply from Immolations who said, a lot of the supposed ethical dilemmas that get thrown up in these discussions have no real bearing on reality. Like similarly, the ticking time bomb used to justify torture came about and was popularized in a French novel. It's just nonsense, really. I thought that was such a, you know, well put point. Because you remember with that torture debate, but would you torture someone if you needed to torture them to stop an atrocity that was about to happen? It's like, well, this is is it an interesting ethical question? But I mean, it's potentially an interesting ethical question, has absolutely nothing to do with counterterrorism, because this isn't an example that happens in real life. And it's exactly the same with, would you shoot a terrorist even if you hadn't put them on trial yet? Like, yeah, it's an interesting ethical question. Well, if you're into that kind of thing, it has nothing to do with anti-terrorism. It actually has nothing to do with law and order. So it's just this complete non sequitur, but which ends up like dominating the political debate and really just pulling down the political debate to a level which is just kind of stupid, essentially.
Stupid, asinine. You know, it's like saying, Michael, somebody might be a security expert, right? And rather than talk to them about, okay, well, what are the threats of asymmetric warfare in the 21st century and, you know, and informational warfare? And is that really a new novel weapon that we've seen in the last 20, 30 years, outgrowth of the internet, or has it always existed? You know, rather than that, you say, who'd win in a fight between 30 kangaroos and 5 members of the SAS? Huh? It's an interesting question, isn't it? Yeah. Who would win? And that's basically the level we're talking on here, right? Well, if there was a ticking time bomb, would you talk to somebody? Because they might, you know, this is like with, you know, 24 or with Jack Reacher or with Tom Cruise and Mission Impossible. That isn't the real world. This isn't Hollywood. Carl Turner, you're the MP for Hull. I can't think of places. I'm on the south coast in Portsmouth. We're not in LA, guys. Okay, the reality of crime is super, super different. You know, so get off your little fantasy fairy tale, you know, rage treadmill, and join the rest of us, and maybe try and solve some real world problems.
It's also worth noting, actually, I think, because this row as well, I think Angela Rayner is trying to say, I'm not like Jeremy Corbyn, because obviously there was that big headline, Jeremy Corbyn wouldn't have shot to kill. I think it was the London Bridge attackers, was it, at that point in time? But then Laura Kuenssberg had to actually apologise for that interview because she like edited it wrong. So it looked like he was answering a question which she hadn't asked, and then, you know, she switched it around. So the controversy here, that the whole idea that there are some people on the left who think that if you've got an active terrorist shooter, you shouldn't shoot them, was fabricated from the start. And that's what Angela Rayner is playing into here, which I suppose we've come to expect from Keir Starmer and basically anyone in his shadow cabinet right now. That's their modus operandi. Keir Starmer wants to dump key aspects of the 2019 manifesto. That's according to City AM, who report this. Exclusive. Starmer to back away from 2019 Labour manifesto with series of key speeches. They probably didn't need to call this an exclusive. It's the kind of thing we've known for a while. In any case, from the article, City AM say, a senior Labour Party source told City AM that Starmer is expected to slaughter the sacred cows of Corbynism in the lead up to summer, with speculation this could soon include ditching the former Labour leader's pledges to nationalise rail, mail, energy and water. As I've said, none of this is surprising. Keir Starmer has shown time and time again that his only pitch to the country is, I'm not Jeremy Corbyn. And his only policy positions are, whatever the left wants, I'll do the opposite. But there's a problem with positing this shift to the right as just slaughtering the sacred cows of Corbynism, because they were also the sacred cows of Keir Starmer. This is one of 10 pledges he made during his leadership campaign. It's still available on his website. So it's Pledge 5. Common ownership. Public services should be in public hands, not making profits for shareholders. Support common ownership of rail, mail, energy and water, and outsourcing in our NHS, local government and justice system. Since making that pledge, Keir Starmer has attempted to suggest it didn't imply nationalisation. For example, last year when speaking to Andrew Marr.
I don't see nationalisation there. There is
what else does public
difference.
hands mean?
There's a world. Well, public services should be in public hands, but when it comes to something like energy, we've got an immediate problem in the next few months that we've got to solve. And then when it comes to common ownership, I'm pragmatic about this. I do not agree with the argument that says we must be ideological.
No one makes the argument we must be ideological. That's just not an argument anyone makes. There was no ambiguity, though, during the leadership debate on Newsnight.
I'm asking you to raise your hands. When you go into the next election, would you have any of these in your manifesto, potentially? First of all, raise your hands if you're into scrapping tuition fees. That's everyone. Renationalising water and electricity. Yeah.
Of course, we're used to Keir Starmer going back on his word. In his now infamous 10 pledges, he promised to put human rights at the heart of Britain's foreign policy, then abstained on the Overseas Operation Bill, which effectively allows British troops stationed abroad to use torture. He pledged to defend freedom of movement, which Labour have now explicitly abandoned, and he promised to unite the party before spending 2 years relentlessly attacking the left. The latest chapter in that assault involves Starmer's predecessor. The Sunday Times suggested last week that the Labour leadership are plotting to oust Jeremy Corbyn from Parliament. They report there is no mechanism available to deselect Corbyn other than the trigger mechanism under which his local party would have to vote for a new contest, which he would then have to lose. As a popular local MP, this will not pose a threat to him. However, a senior party insider said, "We are determined to bring this to a head. The current position is not sustainable." A source close to Keir Starmer said there was no chance he would bring back Corbyn and that his time in the Labour Party was effectively over. Even if Corbyn apologises for his comments, as was demanded by Nick Brown, the former chief whip, it is understood that the party would find a pretext for continuing his suspension. The belief on the part of Starmer and his allies is presumably that a high-profile fight with Corbyn will only further convince the public that the party has changed. But they might be underestimating the size of the Labour core vote who quite like the previous leader. A YouGov poll at the end of last year showed that among 2019 Labour voters, Corbyn enjoyed the largest support of any former party leader. 68% had a positive attitude towards him, compared to only 36% for Starmer. Perhaps Sir Keir would be more popular among Labour voters if he was less obviously dishonest. Aaron, it feels like we've had this conversation many times before because Keir Starmer keeps doing these briefings where he says, I'm going to completely, shit all over Jeremy Corbyn and everything he ever stood for, after standing in the leadership and saying, I'm going to bring the best from Tony Blair and the best from Jeremy Corbyn and respect everyone. Have we learned anything new from this particular briefing?
It's worse than you thought. That's what we've learned, Michael. I mean, I'm kind of entertained, actually, by how bad he is at this stuff. He was asked a question by some young people in Sunderland, or a journalist, I can't remember what it was. It was the sort of atmosphere of young people. And And they said, how will you provide security for young people? And he said, well, oh no, sorry, how will you give security to young people? He said, I will give security to young people by making them feel secure. It's like, who the hell is this guy? Is this really going to be a robust candidate in a general election campaign facing down Linton Crosby? Because it might not be Boris Johnson in charge. It might be somebody else. But the Tories do election campaigns really well. You really want somebody like that? Keir Starmer. There's a world of difference between public ownership and nationalisation. Really? Okay. Well, tell me. Well, we don't want to be ideological about this. And it's just, you're not even answering the question. And like I said at the time, Michael, it wasn't just that he was lying. He'd gone back on his promise. You might not call that lying, whatever. It wasn't just that he was lying. He was then lying about lying on TV in front of everybody, where there was literally evidence on a television behind him showing that he was lying. And I sort of wonder about somebody like that. I mean, he's obviously got to the top of his profession. He's obviously a very talented lawyer. But maybe he's just so good at convincing himself of things, even when it's so completely at odds with the facts, because that's your job, right? As a barrister and as a lawyer, often you're having to argue that case, make that case in as compelling and robust a case as you can. This isn't how it works in politics, because you're having to persuade people using facts and feelings, preferably more facts and feelings, but it's, we have to be real, it's a bit of both. And on both counts, he fails. He doesn't really establish strong feelings in anyone. The best defense for Starmer is he makes people less angry than Corbyn. Okay, fine. Does he enthuse anybody? I mean, is that really going to be enough to be prime minister? I suspect not. We could be wrong. There's 2 years to go. He could get better. But on his talent as a politician, his proclivity to lie, his dislikability, his dishonesty, his absence of policy and ideas, his inability to bring a team together. You saw that with the treatment of Angela Rayner after last May's local election results. I just don't see what there is with this guy. I don't see what there is. Even with Yvette Cooper, who went on the BBC Politics show on Sunday, not the Mars show. I don't know what the hell they call it anymore. It's as crap as it always was, with Sophie Rayworth. And even Yvette Cooper was really pulling her punches when Sophie Rayworth was trying to trap her on Corbyn. And on policy changes. She boxed clever in a way that Starmer can't. I don't really understand why this guy, as I like to call him, Captain Pop-Tart, is held up by the Parliamentary Labour Party as the best they've got, because he clearly isn't. Even if you're on the right of the party or the soft left, he clearly isn't. And at this point, they're flying on the back of his CV. And I think the big test for him is if they don't do well in May, and they may do. We've still got several months. National polling's been generally good for Labour. It's going down recently, but let's see. It's such a dynamic situation with the Downing Street parties and Boris Johnson. If they don't do well, then I do think Labour politicians, particularly those in marginals, will think, look, maybe this isn't the guy for us. And from the other side, from the Labour right, people like Peter Mandelson and so on, they view him as, 1987 Redux anyway. They view him as somebody who'll make inroads into the Tory majority, and then they get a leader further to his right in afterwards, whether that's for the next time or the one after. It's not about solving problems. It's not, look, if you're a renter, if you're worried about, high energy bills, if you're worried about crime, if you're worried about any of these issues, or your student debt, you're about to see your interest payments go up because they're bringing the threshold of repayment down. He's not going to sort any of this. I can tell you this now. He's not going to do anything. I know you disagree about this, Michael. You're like, no, they have a really substantive policy agenda. I just don't think so. Peter Mandelson was the head of communications for the Labour Party in the 1987 general election. Very young man in his early 30s at the time. I really think he and his cronies are looking at the next general election as 87 Redux. That's exactly what they're trying to do. It's about distancing yourselves from the previous guy, bringing the big funders in. And really, I think they'll be focusing on getting right-wing MPs in for the next 5, 10, 15 years. That's the project for them. And I think left-wingers, quote unquote, who I don't think anybody that voted Starmer in on the left who doesn't regret their decision. I don't think you are on the left. I mean, I'm not the universal, font of truth. So you can disagree with me if you like, but I really think that was a very unwise choice. And I personally would regret it if I was them. I think the idea that somehow Starmer is going to lead to a more left-wing party, or the party will be more left-wing after him, no way. The composition of the Labour Party is going to go significantly right now over the next 10 years, certainly over the next 5 years, unless something very drastically goes wrong for the right and the people in charge of the party. Last May, it looked like that may well be the case. Now I'm not so sure.
that we could go further into. I'm sure we'll do that on future shows. For now, I just want to know, what is the Captain Pop-Tart thing about? I saw that on Twitter. I want to know the backstory.
He's kind of got his head. He's got. I mean, I'm not being rude here. It's, people often like a man with an angular head. I say this as somebody with a round head. It's fine. I'm not, body shaming him. His face kind of looks like a Pop-Tart. Like a strawberry.
Yeah, so
Pop-Tart.
you'd be like Captain Cookie. He's Captain Pop-Tart.
That's right. I'm an Oreo. He's a Pop-Tart.
Okay. Yeah. I like that. Let's go to a couple of comments. On Twitch, Spinwood says, I don't know if there is a party that is more ashamed of its own base than Labour. And Steve Anderson with a super chat says, best analysis around. Been stealing Aaron's lines for years, you and me both. And Friday night's added bonus of simmering sexual tension between the two handsome dudes. I think we'll probably leave it there. Aaron Bastani, a pleasure as always, riffing with you on a Friday evening.
I don't know why people think that we don't get on. It's really strange, Michael. I think you and Ash Sarkar, obviously all the Novara team's great, but I think you and Ash Sarkar have, for different reasons, some of the best political instincts of anyone I know. It's the idea that we don't get on is very odd. This is how I talk to everyone, unfortunately.
He was suggesting sexual tension, not us not getting on.
Is there even any tension? Michael, you're a very good-looking man, but why is there any tension about that? I was the one that highlighted people are having plastic surgery to look like Michael Walker.
That sounds like sexual tension. Anyway, I think a little bit of tension is good. We don't need to fight this. I'm not sure I believe that. Very quickly. Is that true?
It's not true, but there are people that have this kind of jaw thing. They're in. I kind of a Michael Walker job. So they put whatever Botox in their jaw. Because you got a great jaw, make it more angular. So
you're a very strong advocate for me. You've always been a strong advocate for me. I really appreciate it, and I do appreciate our Friday evenings together. Let's wrap it up there. We'll be back on Monday at 7 p.m. Have a great weekend. You've been watching Tysky Sour on Novara Media. Good night.